the wire in back or in front? Good, that looks good. Don't touch.
Okay. So, good afternoon. I hope you all had a good lunch. Just to perhaps this morning, we went through precious human rebirth, and maybe I can quote Tsongkhapa from the three principal aspects of the path. By cultivating in mind that this human life is so hard to find, yet has no time to spare, preoccupations with this life will cease. By contemplating repeatedly the truth of karma and samsaric suffering, preoccupations with next life will come to cease. The Tibetan word is Lodok Namshi. Lodo Namshi. Lodo Namshi is, I don't know the exact English translation. Would you know Lodok Namshi? Lodok Namshi. Excuse me? Oh, yes, thank you. 4 thoughts of turning the mind, yes. So this is exactly that, right? Jeremiah is reminding us to turn our mind, our normal mind, our default mind. So to turn that. So by cultivating that this human life is so hard to find and that there is not much time, If you do that, then preoccupations or attachment, I think, to this life will cease. And if you think about the truth of karma and think about the suffering in samsara, the 8 types, the 6 types, the 3 types of suffering. If you think like this, then preoccupations to the next life then will come to cease. So this is very important, and the first 2 as with the four parting ways, with the four partings, the first one that deals with that, how to turn our mind, how to turn ourselves from just thinking about the pleasures of this life. So we do that by thinking about the precious human rebirth, by thinking about this opportunity, this precious opportunity that we currently have, and then thinking, and to develop a sense of urgency, then we think the impermanence of that, think about how fragile, life is. So with that, then we try to sort of shift our ambitions, to shift our way of thinking, to shift our way of planning for the future, Then the second part, by thinking about karma, the law of cause and effect, and thinking about suffering of samsara, then we are then shifting away from making these other plans, for the next lives, making plans for having pleasures, for having a good rebirth, for having a rebirth with comfort and pleasurable and so forth. So by thinking of these 2 points, karma and samsara, then we are turning away, from attachment onto the far future, not this life, but the next life. So with this, I think this will be the first two of the four partings, right? So we will leave it there. And then on the subject of taking refuge, again, I'm speaking to those who are new to the Dharma, because that's I feel more comfortable, when I'm addressing them, because the other people in this room, those of you who are quite experienced, who have met many eminent masters, who have been in the Dharma, for longer than I've been a human being, then I don't feel as comfortable talking to you about these things, But to those of you who are maybe more similar to me, when it comes to these subjects, then I feel like I'm sharing something, So you are here sort of, giving me marks, giving me marks and making sure that I'm not stepping out of the line. Right? Right. On the subject of taking refuge, again, as we talked about in our morning session, then when it comes to the external behavior, or external code of conduct, when taking refuge, then those who are not so familiar with the Dharma, then may find that quite difficult, right? At first. But then, for us Buddhists, we need to understand, what refuge means, what taking refuge means. We have to make sure that we understand that correctly, and what it is that we are taking refuge in, and how do we take refuge. With this, then, I think His Holiness always, again, brings in the elements of the two truths, the Four Noble Truths, And with this, I think it is easier to understand, and it's easier to take refuge with that way, using those. Then, if you think, and if you analyze those teachings firsthand, first you hear the Dharma, you contemplate, you think and try to think deeper and deeper. Of course, all of this has to come out of some form of curiosity, right? Curiosity. At first it is curiosity, but if you really analyze, these points, these teachings, then gradually it will start to make sense, the two truths, the Four Noble Truths, that way of looking at our world, that way of looking at our being. It starts to make sense, gradually it will. All it takes is some diligence from your side, some diligence, some effort, and not always sort of falling for the things that we are exposed to in the media, that tries to explain otherwise, that tries to explain you what your life should be, or that tries to define happiness for you, So if you can sort of block that for the time being, and then get your mind in the direction of the Buddha's teachings, then I think as you become more used to these ideas, these concepts, this way of looking at our world, then you are becoming closer to the Three Jewels, And if you become closer to the Three Jewels, then I think that is the best way of taking refuge, to develop a sense of closeness with the Three Jewels, to develop a sense of closeness to the Buddha, to his teachings, and to the group of community that follows that teaching, If you do that, then you have just taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So I think this is how I wouldn't say everyone should do it like this way, but if when you try to take refuge in the traditional sense, like with the ceremony and all that sort of thing, and if that is a little uncomfortable for you, then I think this is a good way, of being introduced to the Dharma, and of being sort of like being, in a way, taking refuge in the three jewels is like being inducted. It's like being inducted in the Buddhist Hall of Fame. I don't know, but of course it's not like that. Anyhow, I think, if you do it this way, then it might be beneficial. And maybe at this point we will go with, where were we? We finished, I think, verse 10. And now we are on verse 11, right? Okay. After death, there is no guarantee that you will not be reborn in one of the three unfortunate realms. Nevertheless, it is certain that the three jewels of refuge have the power to protect you from their terrors. For this reason, your taking of refuge should be extremely solid, and you should follow its advice without ever letting your commitments weaken. Moreover, your success in doing so depends on your considering thoroughly which are the black or white karmic actions together with their results, and then living according to the guides of what is to be adopted or rejected. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. You who also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. So I think here, J. Rinpoche, beautifully just captures the point of taking refuge, and then what do you do after that? The precepts, the commitments. If we were to take refuge in the three jewels, primarily because we want to be free from perhaps the first type of suffering or just the second type of suffering, then that is like a temporary way of taking refuge, It's like if you take refuge that way, then when you attain maybe a good rebirth, then you don't need to take refuge, You have sort of, you have fulfilled your wish, right? But if you think about the larger picture, if you think about the larger picture, if you approach your suffering in a holistic way, right, then you have to get back down to the roots, right? Down to the roots of your suffering, right? Down to the roots of why you're suffering. I think it's better than saying, I think it is better to say getting down to the roots of why you're suffering, than to say getting down to the roots of your suffering. I think that for me that makes more sense, right? So if you get down to the roots of suffering, or why we are suffering, then you can get the whole picture, You start to see the whole picture. If you only are focused about the first two types of suffering, then merely taking refuge, right, in the three jewels, and then sort of refraining from committing some negative actions will suffice. So obviously it's easier, and the result is not that difficult to achieve, and once you and just as the result is not that difficult to achieve, the result is somewhat more temporary. You may attain a higher rebirth, but there is an expiry date to that, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear the first part when you were describing. Would you mind just repeating it a little bit louder?
Okay.
Just that. Thank you.
The first part,
Taking refuge in, you said,
I'm not good at backtracking. Excuse me. Could someone help me out? Like which part?
Taking refuge in two sufferings, and then next life having a good human rebirth, and then you don't need to take a refuge again.
Oh, okay. So I think maybe it was this. When we take refuge, am I audible?
Yes.
Is this good? Is this level okay? Can everyone can hear okay? Little louder. More loud? More loud. Okay.
So I cannot turn up the volume any higher,
Okay.
but I can turn it down if you get louder.
Okay. Right. Yeah. When we take refuge, obviously, we need to have some sort of fear, right? We need to have some sort of fear. Otherwise, why would you take refuge in the first place? Is this okay? Yeah. Okay. I don't sound like now, I hope that I don't sound like a boxing commentator. And I don't have the vocal box, the vocal box, right? Okay. Yeah. So when we take refuge, we need to have a wish to be free from something. Maybe fear is not the right word, but I'm careful because if I use some other word, that might end up just being an euphemism for fear, So I just want to be more direct and use the word fear, whether we like it or not, So we must have some form of fear, right? Otherwise, there is no point in taking refuge. And if you have a problem with the word fear, then I want to tell you that you don't need to be afraid of using that vocabulary. You don't need to be afraid of using that, because fear it's an emotion that we have. It is an emotion that we have already. It is just as we want to be happy. It is natural to have fear because We want to be happy, therefore we are automatically, we fear suffering, it's unpleasant. It stops us from achieving our goal, happiness. So fear is not a bad thing. Fear it can be a bad thing if you don't know how to regulate fear, right? Regulate. If you don't know how to control your fear, or if you don't know how to deal with your fear, that can be negative, That can have negative consequences. But it is important in the context of taking refuge. So if it is, as I was mentioning, if it is, maybe this was the part that you were referring to, if you are taking refuge merely out of having fear of having from the first two types of suffering, is that the part? Then if you with that, if you take refuge, then I was making this reference that I think this is like a temporary form of taking refuge, because when you take a good rebirth, then you don't need to take refuge anymore, right? In a way, because you have already fulfilled your wishes. So it lasts maybe for one lifetime, You take refuge and then you refrain from committing negative actions, and then you try to accumulate some positive karma, positive actions, and then the next life you have taken rebirth in a positive realm, right? Positive or more fortunate, in a fortunate realm, right? So that seems very maybe like short term, it's short term. But again, even for that form of taking refuge, it still needs some effort on your part, that you have to think about suffering, not try to sort of like close the door at suffering, right? But you have to accept those two levels of suffering, and the middle one, is sometimes quite difficult. It's quite difficult, even though it is not as difficult, we say, relative to the third type of suffering. Still, the second type of suffering, compared to the first type of suffering, is more difficult to know, right? It's more difficult to know. So even that takes some form of analyzing. So when you look at suffering, when you look at how we suffer, when you look at those aspects, then still on that level, this is somewhat, it's not fundamental. It is not a fundamental approach. I don't think that's a good word, fundamental approach. No, it's not looking at suffering on a fundamental level, right? It is not, right? It's somewhat maybe on the surface, right? On the surface. So if you sort of look beyond the first two types of suffering, and then you realize that people are suffering, not just these two types of suffering, but that sentient beings everywhere are also going through the same suffering. That they're also not fully satisfied, right? They're not fully satisfied. The word suffering is quite difficult to use sometimes. Maybe when we are not fully satisfied, then that is like samsara, When things are not going our way, that is what that could be termed something like suffering. You know, suffering should not be. It's the Buddhist notion of suffering. It's not emotional, right? It could be an emotion, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. You know, it is rather suffering is rather a way of being. You know, it's more than just your emotions. It's actually being in this situation where you're not satisfied, right? It is being not satisfied. That is samsara, right? Not being satisfied. And that word, you know, not being satisfied, when you say that, then it shows that there is some desire there, you know, that there is some desire. I want to be happy, right? There is some form of desire. So being affected, right? Being influenced by desire. Even though we talk of the three mental poisons, I think attachment, you know, desire plays a very important role, you know, a very important role. Even though ignorance is it's given higher status, right? Higher status. Still, it is desire, you know, that gets thing done. You know, that gets thing done. So, desire is a bit like the handyman, you know, the handyman, right? It's always in action and it gets things done, you know. And ignorance is just like behind the scenes, and you don't really see that, right? So desire sort of runs the show, right? So going back to our suffering, if you approach suffering on a fundamental level, then the three mental poisons, you know, you always come to that. You always come to that conclusion, the three mental poisons. It doesn't matter if you go clockwise or anti-clockwise, you always come to the same point, you know. Ignorance, desire, and anger. You know, those three. They are the root of our problems. You know, they are the root of the world's problems. And if you realize that these three are the root of all our problems, once you realize that, then the desire to be free from that is automatic, right? It is automatic. That will come naturally. The only difficult thing is to realize that the three mental poisons are what really runs samsara, you know. They are like the framework, you know, something like that. And one of the differences here is that if you go down to the fundamental level and see the root cause of suffering, and when you develop this wish to be free from suffering, And then following the Buddha, his teachings, and relying on his community, that you are sort of making a pledge, So from until now to the moment that I achieve liberation, I attain liberation, then I go for refuge, I go for refuge in the three jewels. So this is long term. So this is one way of taking refuge. And in this way, when you take refuge, you're primarily taking refuge in the causal refuge. Is that right? Causal refuge. Now, if you when you make that jump from just thinking about the first two types of suffering and now to the third type of suffering, when a student does that, when we do that, then we are always using ourselves, as the basis of our analysis. We are always putting ourselves and using that as the model, right? Once you do that and you gain a certain spontaneity, so this is when you develop this spontaneous wish to be free from suffering, that is called renunciation, right? Renunciation. When you achieve that, then you are sort of eligible to then use others, as the base of analyzing the varying levels of suffering. You can then meditate. You can then meditate using them as the model, right? As the basis of meditation. And through that, when you develop a spontaneous wish that other sentient beings be free from the three types of suffering, then that is compassion, great compassion, unconditional compassion. When a Bodhisattva, takes refuge in the three jewels, not only does the Bodhisattva take refuge in the causal refuge, but also in the resultant refuge as well. Whereas in the person, the refuge according to the refuge corresponding to the person of small capacity and medium capacity, then you're primarily taking refuge in the causal refuge. So, in other words, you're taking refuge in someone else, someone out there, right? Whereas in the Bodhisattva, then not only are you taking refuge, let us say that when a Bodhisattva takes refuge in Buddha Shakyamuni, not only is the Bodhisattva taking refuge in Buddha Shakyamuni, but also taking refuge in the resultant Buddhahood, in the resultant Dharma, in the resultant Sangha. Because there is a difference in the Hinayana, or maybe if I could use that term, in that way of taking refuge, then you are not necessarily wishing for full state of enlightenment, but rather you just want to be free from suffering, right? You just want to attain liberation for yourself. So the aim is not to become a Buddha, but the aim is to be free from suffering. Whereas when a Bodhisattva, takes refuge, he's not doing for his or her own concern, but more for the concern of others. So therefore, the Bodhisattva would take refuge and then would take refuge by developing the wish to become a Buddha, right? So that is the two types of taking refuge in the causal refuge and in the resultant refuge. Is that right? Resultant refuge, causal refuge. Now we have three objects of refuge, but we say that the main object of refuge, or the real or the true object of refuge, is not the Buddha, is not the Sangha, but it is the Dharma. It is the Dharma, we say. When we say Dharma, then we have to be careful. And when was it? Was it yesterday when we went through Vasubandhu's citation? Right? There, in the eighth chapter, Vasubandhu says, the excellent teaching of the teacher is twofold. Those teachings having a nature of scripture and those having a nature of realization. So Dharma in English, I think here translated as teaching, right? Teaching. In this sense, I think the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha is a bit like the teacher, the teaching, and the classmates, right? Something like that, But anyhow, we have to make sure that we don't, when we think of teachings, or when we think of Dharma, we don't go back to this citation, This citation says that teachings are twofold, those having the nature of scripture, that is, scriptural teachings, and then those having the nature of realization, right? So that is, in other words, spontaneous experiences, right? Related with, of course, our practices. When, in the context of the three jewels, when we say Dharma, we usually, that Dharma is again twofold, right? It's again twofold. So one is similar to the second type of this, which is the teachings having the nature of realization. And then the second one is the quality of cessation, the quality of ceasing, right? The quality of having ceased obscurations, forms of obscurations. So when we say the true, I don't know what the English word for is. Actual, or the actual object of refuge. The actual object of refuge is Dharma, and within that, within those two types, it is the cessation, So the cessation of obscuration, the cessation of suffering is the actual object of refuge. Why is that? Because that is the cessation of what we are being fearful, right? Of what we are having fear from. So simple as that, There's no further explanation as to why that is the actual refuge, It is purely because that is where it ceases. That is where the fear ceases, From that point, there is no more fear. So therefore, that is the actual object of refuge. And then, in the Lamrim Chenmo, there are many refuge precepts. But I think one of the more important one is to remember the three jewels on a daily basis. When we get up, think about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Think about the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If we do this, there is a benefit to that. When we get up, if we can start the day by reflecting on the qualities of the three jewels, then I think that then would sort of set the stage for the day, Then if you begin the day by thinking about the three jewels and developing some sense of faith or belief or joy, if you begin that day, with having this untainted joy, then I think as time passes throughout the day, if you are in a situation where you might be tempted, or where you might get a little grumpy, or I don't know, other things, then I think you are in a better position to sort of remind yourself, because you started the day. So you started the day on such a positive note, So this is, I think, the most important thing that we should take away from all the precepts. And of course, like other things like making offerings when we have, the 3 meals, or tea, coffee, and so forth. Those are, again, I think, very, very important. But sometimes I do have my reservations when we make that like a part of, almost like ritualistic, It becomes sort of ritual, and then we say the 1 verse or 3 verse or 6 verses, whatever, pages and pages. If we just, recite that without really taking some time to reflect on what it is that we are offering to, who we are offering to, then I think it would just be a ritual, nothing more. But even if you don't know all the right wordings, but if you can take a few moments, just a few seconds, if you just think, if you remember the 3 jewels, if you remember, your spiritual master, and if you can reflect on his or her qualities and then make this offering, then I think this also, not only are you creating a good merit of making an offering, but it also, I think, has a practical benefit, because it helps your mind. It takes away some of the negativity that you might have at that moment, right? Or the moments a few minutes before, or the future, or any potential negativity that might arise. So that could sort of play a role, as a preemptive measure. Yes. So I think it can play any role, back and forth. So I think this is one thing that some of the things that we can do, that we can take away from this verse. Yeah. But as it is mentioned here, then the more important thing is then as it is mentioned here, considering thoroughly which are the black or white karmic actions, the virtuous and the non-virtuous actions. I think with the non-virtuous actions, one of the most dangerous, I wouldn't say dangerous, but the easiest one to create or to that we may commit is obviously idle chatter, right? Is that right? Idle chatter, right? Idle chatter. So chattering without really much purpose. Yeah. Because it is the reason idle chatter was counted in that list I don't think it was because it can be so damaging, because it can't be that damaging, right? But the reason why it made it to that list is that with idle chatter, you could really waste a lot of time. You could really waste a lot of time. So, wasting, if you waste time, then you are really missing on this. You're really missing out, on this other thing, on your potential. Then we would be missing out on lots of things, So even for someone, let alone someone who is trying to practice the Dharma, even if you are, I don't know, a student, a university student, I think idle chatter should still also be put on the, I don't know, on the don't do list, Yeah, don't do list. Yeah. Okay. And then verse number 12. The fullest the fullest strides of progress in actualizing the supreme paths will not come about unless you have attained the working basis of an ideal human body that is complete with all 8 ripened favorable qualities. Therefore, you must train in the causal virtuous actions that will preclude your attainment of such a form from being incomplete. Furthermore, as it is extremely essential to cleanse away the stains of black karmic debts and downfalls from broken vows, tarnishing the 3 gateways of your speech, of your body, speech, and mind, and especially to remove your karmic obstacles, which would prevent such a rebirth, you should cherish continually, devoting yourself to applying the complete set of 4 opponent powers, which can purge you of them. So this is Adam talking about the 4 opponent powers. But it was quite a journey getting to that. Yes. Yes. So the 4 opponent powers. Okay, so in this order here, it is mentioned as the 4 opponent powers are the power of eradication, the power of applying remedies, the power of turning away from faults, and the power of foundation. The power of foundation is considered very important. I have now some doubts because right now we are in the outline of the general characteristics of karma, right? The general characteristics of karma. And we have not yet, bodhicitta is still, it hasn't started, right? So then usually we say the power of foundation is taking refuge and bodhicitta, right? Bodhicitta. So then the explanation is that when we commit any negative deeds, we usually do that either we commit a negative action corresponding to an enlightened being or to a sentient being, to a sentient being. So if we want to purify the negative action corresponding to an enlightened being, then to purify that, then the power of the foundation, specifically taking refuge, is a prerequisite, right? And if we commit a negative action corresponding to sentient beings, then bodhicitta is a prerequisite. This is the power of the foundation. So just as someone who falls on the ground has to get off the ground, using the ground as the foundation, right? So likewise, if you then this is why we have the power of foundation. 땡기톱, 땡기톱, 땡기톱. Number 순짐비톱, 냐발레 lar 도베톱, 냠부 균도 쪼베톱. And then I think then the second one is the power of eradication. The power of eradication. This is recognizing the negative actions committed, recognizing that what we have just committed is negative. So this is the power of eradication. And then turning away from faults, the power of turning away from faults refers to trying to make sure that we don't repeat that, trying to make sure that we don't repeat that mistake. And then the power of applying remedies is that once we have the three powers, then with the three powers, then if you commit any virtuous actions, for the purpose of purification, then that would be the power of applying remedies. So even with the right motivation, with the three powers, if you have that, then even if you, let us say, circumambulate, then that becomes, that act of circumambulating a stupa or a gomba then becomes the power of applying remedies. Whereas if you have none of the three powers, and if you just circumambulate, then you may receive good merit, but it still doesn't become the power of applying remedies. So the power for an virtuous act, right? For a virtuous action to be a power of applying remedy, then the first three powers, I think, need to be met, right? They need to be motivated, in that order. So first the power of foundation, and then the power of eradication, and then the power of turning away from faults. Is that?
Also, the first one is the power of regret, and that kickstarts all the other.
Yes, but here it's different terms are used. So I was wondering which regret would be. Is that the power of eradication, or is that the power of turning away from faults? I was thinking the power of regret would be the power of turning away from faults. Is that?
So
that's not it? Okay, then it's my fault. As you say, my bad. My bad. Sorry for the mistranslation. Yes. So actually, what you translated, I saw that I think in liberation in the palm of your hand, and that is easy, but this one is a little difficult. I think this is trying to be very faithful, technical. It's trying to stay very, very faithful to the Tibetan word, and then that becomes a little difficult to understand, and then you don't know which is which, because they sound That sounds quite technical. And so, according to that translation, in the liberation in the palm of your hand, it is the power of regret. Okay, the power of regret. And then before regret, what is that? What is the one?
After regret, it was reliance of foundation, relying on.
No, before. Before regret, what do you call that power?
So, in his Holiness's presentation, he presented the power of regret first.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because that, when you have regret, then you do the other.
Oh, right.
If you don't have regret, then there's no sense in going through the other.
Okay. So first is regret and then
Reliance or foundation.
reliance or foundation.
Yeah, reliance on the refuge and then.
Oh, so this is power of foundation. Okay. And then
And then virtuous activity to remedy. And then the last one is resolve, promise never to do it again or not to do it again.
oh, right.
That's how he.
Oh, yes. Then I was wrong. Yes. So I think in liberation in the palm of your hand, I think first one was the power of foundation, and then the power of regret, and then the power of not committing that again, right? That one, and then the last one is the power of applying remedies. Okay. So this is the right order. Well, I think you can. There are different orders, right? There are different orders. So it all depends on how you approach, right? On how you approach and how you apply these powers. So they need not be, you don't have to think, oh, it says in this order here, but in this other Lamrim text, it's in a different order, So there is, these orders are meant, I think, primarily for the student, So it is really up to you to how you want to use those powers in whichever order that is most beneficial for you. So this is important. But still, I apologize earlier when I explained these 4 powers here. I think I got 2 wrong, because I got 2 wrong, like 2 wrong, right? Not 2 wrong, but 2 wrong. Right. Because I think I said to realize that you made a mistake. That is not in any of the powers. So my apologies there. And then in karma, then these 4 aspects, these 4 aspects of karma, right? Beginning with the certainty of karma, the magnification of karma, not experiencing the effects of actions that one has not committed, and the actions you have done do not perish, right? These are the 4 aspects of karma, as it is mentioned in the sutras. So as I think this is one of the features of karma that Rinpoche was referring to in his 3 principal aspects of the path. Again, in the West, when you study the Dharma, and you come across, these teachings, talking about karma, talking about karma, especially like the certainty of karma, the magnification of karma, maybe especially magnification of karma, then that might sound quite familiar, that might sound quite familiar because of your background, many of you were raised in non-Buddhist backgrounds, so you have also heard maybe something quite similar, Of course, not using the same words, but in meaning something quite similar. Karma is very important because it is what we use to connect, the three times: the past, the present, and the future. Without karma, then there is no bond, right? There is no glue. So karma is the glue for the three times. These features of karma, they cannot be explained in a rational way, in the sense that you can explain emptiness or dependent arising using our experiences, right? And using logic, That's like some form of algorithm, right? But karma is much more difficult. You cannot explain it in a logical sense. You cannot. When you go down to the more deeper level of karma, down to the deeper level of karma, the deep level. Many times I think we have glimpses of karma. We have glimpses of past lives. We see that, Maybe not our past lives, but we might have some glimpses about that in other people's past lives and their present life. We have glimpses, but we cannot give an explanation. We cannot give a logical explanation for that. It is something that you have to sort of see for yourself, even though it is momentarily, it just, you see it and then it passes by, and it just becomes a story, It just becomes something that you can just talk about, but at that moment it's very powerful when you feel that. So this is what I feel about the difficult aspects of karma. Buddha said that karma and its results, it's beyond our imagination. It's beyond us at this point, because we have to rely so much on our sense faculty, right? Mainly on our five senses. This is what we usually work with, right? But these glimpses, of course, we can see. we get these glimpses. And when we have that glimpse, then we have to make sure that we sort of hold on to that, right? And we have to make sure that that can give us some push, to make sure that that can propel us, that can that can propel us to the other side of samsara, to make sure that when we see this, I think some of you have felt this, that I know that some of you have experiences, not ordinary experience, not something that ordinary people, even if they hold, I don't know, high doctorate degree, very, very intelligent, but those people cannot get this glimpse that you're getting, right? That you get. So when you have those experiences, then it's important not to have any doubts. Just make sure to use that experience, to turn that and use that opportunity, use that so that you can devote the rest of your life for a higher state, so that you can make that experience useful. Otherwise, it just becomes like a dream. It has really then no significance. But if you understand, the significance of that experience, and if you are able to direct, to direct that for a good cause, then I think this can undoubtedly benefit your practice. So this is very important. And like, for example, like when I said when I said how we cannot really logically explain karma, right? Especially the second one, the certainty of karma is okay, but the magnification of karma, why is that? Why is that the case? Why is that if I commit a non-virtuous act and if I don't purify that, why does that magnify? Well, I think there might be a way of logically explaining that, and I think we might have to then talk about DNA, then how it sort of, those germs, they become 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 like that. So I think we can, if we can try to learn something from that, then maybe we can also, then this might make sense, right? This might make sense. This might make sense. I don't know what to call them, germs, right? They're the one that multiply, right? The cells, they multiply, right? So karma is like a cell, and it multiplies. So if you don't take antibiotics, then it could really things could get really out of hand, right? But again, these things, it's not so important to verify all these points, in the Lamrim. It's not important that we sort of take on that responsibility to verify every single paragraph or every single word or letter. That is not the point. That's not the point. It is obvious that when the Buddha gave teachings on karma, it's obvious, what his intents were, what his intention was. And it was to get people to think, it was to sort of wake people up, to wake people up. And this is the important thing, We use the stories, that is presented in the Lamrim. Many stories when it comes to karma, and our masters say that when it comes to karma, then stories are very, very important. They are very important, and in the Tibetan word, I think we say Yishegi Lung, right? Yishegi Lung. So these stories, then, but by listening to these stories, then we develop a belief. By listening to our story, we develop a belief. And then not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not do. And then the actions that you have done do not perish. Then again, number 3, that can also sort of take our mind, if you think about that. Not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not do. If you analyze this, if you think about this, then I think right now, am I audible? Is this good? Yes. Okay. We are all here in this room. Right now, in this moment, we are all here trying to think of Lamrim, right? Even though we are trying to think of Lamrim, and when this person that is facing you utters a few words, and then you all try to pick on those words, right? There is something going on here, right? There is something going on. But as I'm speaking, when I say one word, right? When I say, let's say, the Buddha, the moment I say Buddha, everyone in this room will probably try to put their mind on Buddha, right? When you do that, each of us is then concentrating or focusing or sort of changing our orientation and then orient our mind towards the Buddha. Orient towards the Buddha, is that right? Orient. The moment we do that, all of us in this room, the moment we do that, Buddha might appear to us in different ways. If we all in the same room try to think of Buddha at the same time, to each of us, he will not appear in the exact same way, right? He just won't. Why is that? Why is that? If we all went out together and had, I don't know, I already said spaghetti this morning. So, okay, so if you all went out this morning and had Caesar salad, right? Right? We all have that at the same moment. And we all, when we eat that, we are experiencing something, right? We are experiencing the lettuce, the vegetables, right? We all get some experience. But each of those experience is unique, We can never fully express that experience, It is something that we experience at that time. And after you come out of the restaurant, then it is like a glimpse, You can only talk about it, but you can never ever repeat that same experience again, because if you go back to the restaurant again and order Caesar salad, it would taste different because you already had salad, and if you have salad for the second time, then it wouldn't be as delicious, right? So you have different experience. And all of those experiences is unique to the experiencer, Each of those experiences is unique. So, not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not do. When I experience something, I cannot experience the exact thing that you are experiencing because I have not, so to speak, if I may use the word, I'm not sort of entitled to having the same experience as you are experiencing right now because I have not committed those actions that results in your experience, right? I know I'm trying to make something that's very easy, very difficult. Sound difficult. In short, as long as we have different mental continuum, we cannot have the same experience, period. Okay, so at this point, then, like this morning, maybe we can take a few moments off, and reflect on any point. You can take time because we talked about, we went through the triple jewel, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And after, okay, so why we should rely on the Buddha, on the Dharma, and on the Sangha. And after we have started relying on them, then what are the things that we should do to sort of continue that relation, How do we continue our relation with the three jewels? How do we approach them in our daily life? And what are the promises, what are the commitments that we should keep? And then the karma, the certainty of karma, the magnification of karma, and not experiencing what we have not committed, and that what we have committed, that they will not perish. So we went through these aspects of karma, and 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 ultimately, the law of karma is such that we can, except for some exceptional cases of directly having glimpses of the cause and effect factor, other than that, we cannot use logical reasoning to understand karma, So, not objectively, but more subjectively, more subjectively, we cannot understand karma using that. If we really take the experiencer out of the picture, then there really is no way of truly understanding karma. And then when we commit negative karma, when we harm a sentient being or commit some actions that would result in harming of sentient beings, then to purify those actions, then what do we need to do? What are the remedies? So then we went with the 4 opponent powers, and yes. So perhaps we can take a few moments off and reflect. Okay. Thank you. And now, shall we? If someone has a question, then shall we begin?
You said that the only difficult thing to realize is that the 3 mental poisons are what run samsara. Can you elaborate on why you said it's hard to realize that?
Oh, excuse me?
You said when you're talking about the 3 poisons, you said that it's hard to realize that it's the 3 mental poisons that run samsara. Can you elaborate?
Yes. we maybe by our nature, we are the type of people that I think most of us, we are the type of people that will only start to think, or that will only start to take actions when the symptoms arise, when we see a symptom, right? It's a bit like when we have some sickness, when we have the symptoms, then we understand something's wrong, right? But normally, if we don't see the symptom, then we are okay. We think, I'm healthy, right? I'm healthy. So, the first two types of suffering, they are like the symptom, right? They are like the symptom. And then the three mental poisons obviously are the cause of that symptom. And the third type of suffering, it's the fact that we have not overcome the three mental poisons. So the third type of suffering is a bit like that. The fact that we have still not overcome the three mental poisons. And desire and anger, they are easy to recognize from our own experience, but it is ignorance that is the most difficult to understand, And not only is it difficult to define ignorance, but to pinpoint it, pinpoint it when it arises, it's even more difficult, because it is not an emotion in the sense that desire and hatred are, or maybe desire and hatred are accompanied by stronger emotions, whether ignorance is more accompanied by more subtle feelings or subtle emotions. So either way, it doesn't matter how you put it, but this is the case, So ignorance is difficult to understand. Then if ignorance is so difficult to understand, then to link our daily problem to that, it would be even obviously more difficult, right? Would be even more difficult. If you really understand this third type of suffering, then I think you are quite near to understanding, past lives and next lives and all that, They're all connected, If you know one, then the other one is not that difficult to understand. They're near each other, If you see one, then it's like you will eventually see the other. When something, when a disaster happens, and, is that a result of karma, when a tragedy happens, is that a result of karma? His Holiness, at one of the Mind and Life dialogues, I remember him asking the Sangha, the monastic community, when a leaf falls down from a tree, now is that karma? Right? And His Holiness was not so sure, His Holiness said, this is because of natural, it is the law of gravity, right? How is that through karma, right? That's law of gravity, So these questions are difficult to answer, and even just for argument's sake, you could say the law of gravity exists because of karma, right? You could even say that. Of course, the leaf falling down is the result of gravity, and why does gravity exist? Because of karma. One could say that for argument's sake, but I don't think it really brings any clarity to the question. So, these things are difficult, but I will not talk about karma. But going back to your question, I think they're in a way related. Maybe not directly, but if you just go a few steps, then they're quite close. Now, another way of defining this all-pervasive suffering is probably an easier way, something that has to do directly more with our daily experiences, right? So, using this method, using this model, that we have a way of looking outwards, or looking at the world. This way of seeing, of viewing the world, when we look, it really appears, things around us, they really appear as something either really pleasant or unpleasant, from their own side, we would say like this, So this is one way of using this method, and our whole, the good and bad, all of those conventions are based on this fundamental view, or on our fundamental understanding of everything as existing in this way, as if there really is an entity out there existing from its own side, independent of our interaction, this independent object. And on that, everything is built upon that, On that, then these emotions arise, When you see a self-existing object and that appears pleasant, then desire arises. When you see a self-existing object and it appears really unpleasant from its own very being, then anger arises, right? So with these emotions, then we that drives us, that propels us to have physical interaction or speech interaction, This is how we relate with our world, right? So world, again, we can use this word world, which is in itself like a little universe, right? We have an individual world, together with a subject, with an object, and the relation between. But this may be a small world, right? Each of us, we have our own little world, right? And if you think about it, this world was created from that approach. Using that approach, it was created. It all made sense because there was really someone out there, with some quite independent person, an independent object, So this imaginary world is built on that. It is built on that, and like this, maybe that might be an explanation. But then, according to the Lamrim, then I think what I just said, I think is some sort of fantasy, some sort of fantasy. So this is not a complete. It is not a complete assessment of reality, but if it helps, then you can use it. But this is not the last. This is not the last stop. This is not the last stop. And I think the fact that all if you look around, you don't need to think like the universe, but you can just look at the news, You can look at what people do and how people create things, how people destroy things, all the things that happens in this world. If you check, there's always people involved in all those things, Whether something good happens or bad happens, directly or indirectly, it's related with us, right? We are very much part of this problem. So, and we, if we do not commit any actions, then we are good as being non-existent, right? Without our actions, we have nothing. There is no base. So it is through our actions that the world changes. It is through that the world changes. So I want to apply, the state of being influenced by mental afflictions and actions, clashes and karmas. In that way, I don't want to right now give a very classical example, which I think for some of you, maybe it is not the right thing right now. But this way, I think, is also a different way of looking at the same problem. So, thank you. Kunal.
Your Holiness, thank you very much for being here. The example you gave when a doctor has an illness, and his illness, it gives effect. Yeah, the result.
So what do you want to say?
The result is because, the cause had been outside, it's small, and then smaller and smaller, and then all of a sudden, we see it's a little bitty microbe. And then the microbe, really small, and then the microbe expands because he will gets sick. Person gets sick. What am I trying to say?
You want to know why it happens? The
No.
causes, the microbe causes all the
Yeah.
illnesses,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctor
Mm-hmm.
is trying to stop
Yeah, stop the illness.
microbe.
Microbe.
And what? So you want the doctor to stop the microbe as a cause,
Yeah, the cause,
and then the result is that what the doctor did.
what the doctor did.
Okay. So what is the point that you want to make?
Because they're looking so big at this cause to very, very tiny, and their perception
Mhm.
changed because it's so very tiny.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you. So I think ignorance is our microbe, right? Ignorance is this microbe. And with ignorance, then everything grows, right? Everything grows, and all these other emotions, and then actions, and then we start to build some things, and then it really materializes, and everything just becomes big, right? But then if you go back in reverse order, then you just get back to that little microbe. Yes, yes. I think that is a really good example. Thank you. That's a really good example, and because I don't know much about science, but I see, I mean, if you know science, you can use that to really make sense of the world, right? In so many aspects, I think you can use that. Thank you. So now I think we have reached our time limit, but before that, maybe today we had how many questions? 3. Is it 3? Oh. 2 questions. Oh, okay. Although there was 3. What was I about to say? Can anyone help? Yep. Yeah. You have just proven the validity of the third aspect of karma. Right. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, and you all have a nice day. Thank you.